Morning, everyone. Happy It's Sue Gray Day, and welcome to the News Agenda with me, Fleet Street Fox. And today I'm joined by the Mirror's political correspondent, Aletha Adu. Now, this is the People's Paper Review, so get into the comments, ask us your questions. The best ones do get a News Agenda mug. Even Paul, who messaged me this morning to say he hasn't had his yet. It's in the post, Paul. So what have we got today? Well, the Mirror has splashed on reports that civil servant Sue Gray's investigation into Downing Street parties has uncovered pictures of the Prime Minister surrounded by bottles of wine. Whether or not this is a Johnny Depp-style photo of him slumped unconscious among the detritus of a raging addiction, we do not know, but it's probably just wishful thinking on my part. There you go. Now, yesterday, the Met Police announced that they were investigating 8 of the, according to my spreadsheet, 22 alleged social gatherings in Whitehall. And this morning, it's the crime reporters' bylines on the front pages. Although, of course, at the Mirror, Pippa Crerar seems to be on a bit of a job share there. Yesterday, there was a briefing war between Tory MPs, the PM's office and Sue Gray's team about when exactly her report would land and whether we'd ever get to see it. So, Aletha, take us through it. What's the state of play this morning?
Well, it's been quite the 24 hours, Susie, I can tell you that. Firstly, we were told that, Sue Gray will publish this yesterday. Obviously, that didn't happen because Cressida Dick launched her own police probe into these parties. The latest I've heard this morning is that it could be expected to come out probably tomorrow, but some are expecting, delays of up to next week. So we could be seeing this happening maybe even before next week's PMQs. So it's been quite the turnaround of events just because, the Met Police have launched their own investigation. And I spoke to, Boris Johnson's spokesman yesterday, and he was telling me, rest assured they are desperate to have this report out as soon as possible. And they are not trying to obstruct its, publish in any way. They're just, worried about things conflicting. And a number of us in the lobby raised questions like, what is the problem? Like, what problems could be raised if you publish this today or tomorrow? And he couldn't say because he said he is not privy to those conversations with officials in Downing Street and obviously Met Police investigators. But yeah, we're in for quite, a treat with this report. Obviously, we're not expecting Sue to come out as judge and jury and say this was wrong and, Boris Johnson needs to leave Number 10 immediately, even though we may see Tory MPs calling for that very move. But we can expect to see lots of photographic evidence, as you said in your intro, pictures of Boris Johnson at parties, pictures of booze. We've already seen pictures of the fridge that they use to hold these, bottles of alcohol that they were so desperate to drink. You know, we've heard from a number of reports that they were carrying suitcases into Number 10. So it could get pretty ugly. And Dominic Cummings earlier this week was basically saying, you know, the longer this is delayed, you know, we can expect to see even more stories coming out. I mean, we obviously heard ITV's reports of his birthday earlier this week, but, you know, we could expect more and more photos too.
Yes, exactly. It's strange the things they're deciding to take photos of, wasn't it? Now, Mike says, when Sue Gray hands her report to the Prime Minister, will the file have a cake in it? Yesterday, the Northern Ireland Secretary, Conor Burns, anyone for tea and cake? Yes, it's all become a bit of a cake meme, hasn't it? Conor Burns came out and said that Prime Minister was unaware of the pre-arranged birthday party that 30 people had been invited to in the cabinet room on his birthday, and that he was ambushed by a cake. I've been ambushed by wine, but I did actually have to drink it first. So, you know, Better for Britain says, a lot of cake comments, let he without sin cast the first. Oh dear, it's all become a bit silly. Now, but part of the reason this all matters, Aletha, is that whether you approve or disapprove or not of the Prime Minister being ambushed by a cake and who's ultimately responsible for it, the cake bearer or the cake eater or is what all this means in Westminster. So it matters obviously to all those of our viewers who've lost loved ones or missed out on moments of joy recently. But it also means that the government cannot govern. So Tory MPs of all factions no longer seem to be showing much discipline to the Tory whip or the Prime Minister's instructions. He's tossing red meat out in all directions to placate his slathering back benches as they approach him with their teeth bared. And the opposition's got him hemmed in with no room to manoeuvre, because literally nothing that's going on at the moment that could be described as good news for Boris Johnson can be heard over all this din. So yesterday, Ed Davies, the Lib Dem leader, stood up in the House of Commons and said the government was in paralysis, and for the sake of the country, he has to go, just for the sake of government. Is that entering into the thinking of anyone in Westminster, or is it just all about the cake at the moment?
I've spoken to a number of Tory MPs, even one that was apparently going to this so-called event that Boris was hosting in the Commons yesterday, trying to rally some support for senior Tories. And it does seem to be, you know, the mood of some of them, some of the senior ones anyway. Essentially, they're worried that, you know, there are lots of crises going on at the moment. We've got cost of living crises, we've got energy bills that are just currently soaring. You know, we've got this Russian threat, you know, increasing by the day. And we can't hear anyone's thoughts on those issues. Even, you know, we've got people going back to Afghanistan, trying to ensure that people over there are safe and we can get some more people over. And, you know, for the last, 6 to 8 weeks, we've been discussing parties because Boris Johnson has decided to keep evading questions, keep saying that the rules were followed. And then we've been due to wait for this report. He's been repeating over and over. And now the time is here for the report. And, you know, we're yet again being told to just sit back, shush, keep quiet and wait. So, yes, Ed Davey was one of, you know, many MPs in the Commons yesterday calling for him to go, just because, you know, it seems as though a lot of people are tired. And it's not just MPs, it's, you know, the public too. I was speaking yesterday to a few pollsters and they told me that in some cases, Boris Johnson's ratings hadn't actually moved for the last month or so. They've just been as terrible as they were, you know, back in early December. Yeah, and that shows that people have, you know, they heard the initial reports from the mirror of these parties. They've heard initial reports of this general behaviour in Downing Street, and they've just decided that enough is enough. They're quite tired. You know, they do want to move on. I was in Bury last week. A number of people were telling me, oh, but what about Brexit? And he's led us through COVID and he's done really well with this vaccine rollout. But equally, they are also very tired of hearing about this and they just want him to come forward, explain, you know, tell us what's going on in the report. He is, you know, ultimately, you know, in charge of deciding when this can happen. He could just click his fingers and say, let's just have it out right now. Let's just get it over and done with. Equally, he could just come to the Commons at PNQ today and say, look, this is exactly what I think went down. I think that would just end all of this, you know, end all of this chapter. Yes. We're just getting this drip drop of stories day in, day out, week by week. And it's like,
I think you're very optimistic, Aletha. This is a man who doesn't know whether he fired someone because she's a Muslim. He doesn't know if he was at a party.
No, exactly.
He doesn't know if he had a birthday party. In fact, he's fairly certain he never had any parties until a photograph appears, and then he goes, "Oh, that party."
Gosh. It's scary. It's 2022 as well. It's just ridiculous. This is the United Kingdom. But yes, here we are. Got a government that are running scared, essentially. And now, even Liz Truss was on the morning round today, and she's speaking to Kay Burley, and she was just very hesitant to say that she wasn't at any of these parties. And it's just worrying to think that our ministers that are representing us across the world, this isn't just a scandal that, we can see. Everyone across the world can see this, and yet you've got these people that just can't admit what they've done wrong so that we can all just move forward.
They're reporting lockdown parties in the UK in the Sydney Morning Herald at the moment. James says, do you think they're waiting for PMQs to pass to release the report? Are they, Aletha?
That could be a tactic, and looking at the timing now, we would have needed to have the report handed into Number 10 by now for it to come out before PMQs. So it seems likely that the report may come out after PMQs, or most likely tomorrow, I'm hearing. And that's just most likely the Prime Minister's tactic of evading questioning. But again, we've got Prime Minister's questions next week and the week after that. And even when the report comes out, he's going to have to make a statement. So it's just like, what are you hiding from? I don't really understand.
Trying to get another week out of it. Now, Paul says, do you really think the Labour Party could run this country? Paul, I think the Labour Party could probably run a tap, and the government at the moment can't. So it's not a case of whether you prefer Labour or Tory. It's a case of whether you think the people who run the country are capable of running a tap without having a party or some cake, just over themselves or lying. Just anybody. I don't care who it is at this stage. Obviously, someone who will sort out my nuclear test veterans, but just somebody. Now, Stephen says, I do. In fact, I think I could run this country better than yes. I think Larry the Downing Street cat would do a fine job. Stuart says, my grandfather turned 100 in April 2020. We couldn't celebrate his birthday, but they were having a bash for Bozo the Clown's birthday in Downing Street. It's taking the piss. Yes, Stuart, you're right. And there's an awful lot of people, aren't there, Aletha, who have missed out on something or been bereaved in those sort of 2 years that Downing Street's been having these lockdown parties, who have missed out on an awful lot. And they're not thinking, as Edward Lee was saying in Parliament yesterday, that this is just a piece of cake, doesn't matter. There's more important things going on. To millions and millions of people who were locked down and who followed the rules, this is an enormous moral vacuum.
Absolutely. And it's also just, we have to remember the trauma that these people have gone through. Like, even just when I speak to them, it's very hard for them to describe, what happened to their loved ones before they passed, why they weren't able to be there, the repercussions of that, the impacts of that on their own current relationships in their family, and also just how hard it was to send them off in a room of just like 3 or 4 people, including a priest or so, and they're being forced to relive that over and over. Each time a new party comes out and they look at the dates, they're going through the diary. What was I doing this time when that happened? Oh gosh, yeah, that was an awful day. It's just awful. And it's just quite remarkable that it's only recently we've seen Conservative cabinet ministers coming out on their media rounds and saying, oh, we understand the pain that you've been through. Back in, at the end of November, when Pippa first revealed, these parties, in early December, it was, no, all the rules were followed, like, that's it, end of, just drop it. And now it's, oh, yes, we understand your pain. Like, I think a lot of people are going to feel gaslighted and slapped in the face, quite frankly, Susie. It's just awful.
Yeah, and Mark Drayford, the Welsh First Minister, was saying a couple of days ago that there were funerals held in Wales. He had a letter about a funeral where people were not allowed to sing because singing is known to be one of the main, or was thought at the time anyway, to be one of the main causes of spreading the infection. And there they are in Downing Street singing Happy Birthday while not washing their hands, but singing Happy Birthday to the Prime Minister, who was telling everyone else they couldn't even sing at a funeral. Now, Leslie says, will Boris Johnson have the final say on what's included in that report? There has been some discussion, hasn't there, Aletha, about the terms of reference And as far as I'm aware, Boris's lot seem to say they can just publish whatever bits of it they want, while Sue Gray's lot are saying, well, look, all I'm producing is the conclusion. That's what I'm writing down. I'm not producing all the evidence. I'm producing the conclusion, and that conclusion will get published in full. Or so what's actually going to happen?
I mean, technically, Boris can decide how it gets published, obviously when it gets published, what is included. But equally, you know, he shouldn't have that right based on what he has said to the public and obviously the media. We've gone into these lobby briefings over the last few weeks and he has said that, yes, we will publish everything. Over and over again, his spokesman has said this. So, you know, it would be quite shocking for him to turn around and say, actually, you know, we could only include a few lines and just maybe one photograph. So essentially, we're hoping for as much as possible in that. But equally, you know, it may have changed because of this Met Police report. Who knows? Who really knows?
Exactly. If we get words of support from Johnny Depp, we'll let you know. Now, Jackie says, hi, Boris. Boris couldn't help it if it was his birthday. This is silly what they're doing to him. He's a good bloke. He should be staying in. We don't want another prime minister in. You're right. It was just his birthday, Jackie. It was just a cake. There's no harm in that, is there? Except on page 6 of the Daily Mirror today, in our second spread, there's single mother Donna Levermore, 58, born exactly a year before Mr. Johnson. She stayed at home with her 25-year-old daughter, Kirsten, who was recovering from a cancer operation for her birthday. There's Angus Proud, 68, from Barrowford in Pendle in Lancashire, who had a quiet birthday drink in his back garden, only with his partner. There's the Crown actor, and All Creatures Great and Small as well, Sam West, who had a party with his partner and 2 daughters because the other 27 people couldn't make it, he said. There's Sarah Harding Roberts from Wales, who had 2 people singing happy birthday to her from a distance. And I've seen stories about school children, Jackie, whose friends turned up from school and sang happy birthday from the other side of a hedge because they couldn't have their birthday party. So while Boris Johnson's birthday and his cake is really minor and nobody cares about that, everybody who didn't have a birthday party, which is millions of people, do care that he wasn't following the rules.
And can I just add, Susie, that, you know, ITV were reporting that Boris Johnson's wife, Kerry, was going around helping to plan this party. She was responsible for inviting people to this party. Up to 30 people were in this room in number 10. So it's not as if, you know, it was just a random surprise party. It was planned. And equally, we've heard reports of Rishi Sunak accidentally walking into this room. It's just, quite frankly, you know, unacceptable to say that it was all just quite random and it just fell together. It, you know, it's just awful.
And the interior designer with the gold wallpaper, who happened to be in the cabinet room because she wanted to speak to the Prime Minister about why he hadn't paid for it yet, who's suddenly randomly turned up there at a time, it should be said, when tradesmen weren't really entering anybody else's house. So that's a bit weird. Now, Mick says, the point is these people believe they're entitled to be above normal people. Boris Johnson, my brother died alone while you thought the rules did not apply to you and your chums. Sorry, Mick. I don't know what else to say to you there. That shouldn't have happened, should it? But I suppose the fact that so many of us did sacrifice something is that there were hundreds, thousands of lives saved because of what we did. The fact that there were a few people at the heart of government not doing it shows that they do not care about saving lives as much as we do. Please don't think that anybody watching this, that your sacrifices were not worth something, because they were worth something.
Absolutely.
It's a shame that people at the top aren't leading by example, which is what they should be doing. Now, keep asking us your questions. Get into the comments. Let us know how you feel about what's happening here. But there have been some reports from the Johnson side, as you said, Aletha, that Carrie and Boris are rather bemused by all this and can't see that they've done anything wrong, even that they think the hundreds of people who work on the Downing Street estate constitute a household bubble. And although some of these parties were before household bubbles were actually allowed. But these people were, of course, going home to their own households, and we know COVID was rife in Downing Street. So what sense are you getting, Aletha, I suppose, on the mood at the heart of all this in the Johnson household? Are they feeling defeated or bullish or optimistic or what?
I mean, looking from the outside, just as far as I can get to their household, it just seems as though, you know, we just carry on. Like looking at Boris last week in the Commons when he was making his statements before PMQs, just after Christian Wakeford defected, he seemed very sorry, had this very sad face, and everyone's like, oh my gosh, this is the lowest we've seen the Prime Minister. He looks like, he's taking this really seriously, up until after, we heard the Labour leader Keir Starmer speaking, and then, we saw him like waving his watch, making all of these gestures, and it was back to Boris, just clearly not giving much of a monkeys anymore. And that just really seems to be the case when you look at just the list of excuses that he has made, the list of excuses that his colleagues have made on behalf of him. It just seems as though he's just doing everything he can to just cling on to this big job in the United Kingdom and just fight for himself, really. If he was fighting for the country, I think we would have been over this and this wouldn't even be a scandal anymore, because it would have been dealt with by the end of last year. But that's clearly not the case. So it's just quite disappointing.
Yes, it's lying about it and leaving it and hoping it goes away until it gets to the point where it gets so big it's never going away. Futile. Children learn not to do that. Now we are going to round up your questions and comments about what can we call it, Capegate, at the end of all this. So keep going on in the comments. We are going to have a little roundup at the end. But there are bigger issues afoot. And the biggest at the moment is the threat of war on Europe's eastern flanks. As Russia puts battle groups on standby, Putin's double agents are reportedly infiltrating Ukraine, ready to stage a false flag event or bring down their defences. And Britain has sent arms to the border, even while Europe perhaps is not doing quite so much. There's a lot of big talk on all sides, Aletha. Not least was Boris Johnson warning Putin yesterday, and I quote that, a lot of Russian mothers' sons would lose their lives in any conflict, which seems very, very bullish. Are we really about to go to war, or is this all a lot of posturing by people who can be easily ambushed by some cake?
Well, it's difficult to say. I mean, some Tories quite rightly said yesterday that it seems like Putin is gaining an upper hand with all of this because, attention is being diverted on Partygate. Not that that is a bad thing, but quite rightly it seems as though the Russians are just making the most of us, or Boris Johnson appearing to seem distracted. And, we've seen hundreds of thousands of Russian soldiers near Ukraine's border. It does seem quite right that Boris has sort of escalated his, language and, started to make some real threats here. He's previously said, economic sanctions will be used against Russia as a whole. Even last night, I think we heard the American president, Biden, saying that he will personally sanction Putin himself if any sort of advances were made at Ukraine's border. So, I mean, it seems as though we are heading to some sort of, tension, but will it be a war? It's very hard to say at this stage. It just seems as though Putin is trying to, just get some attention essentially, and just, remind everyone that he is still, king of Eastern Europe as he wants to be seen. So that just really seems to be the case. Fingers crossed it will die down, but equally it seems as though NATO and the West are ready for anything that could happen.
Yeah. Well, he did annex the Crimea 8 years ago and never did anything much about it, so he could be forgiven for thinking he could come back and clear the rest of the shelf if he wanted to. But Ukraine has spent those 8 years being very concerned about being attacked and has got very prepared for this sort of thing. And there's a point, of course, at which Europe is not going to stand in further incursions. So we'll have to wait and see. I think personally there'll be a bit of a skirmish, but I don't think there's a war. We'll have to wait and see. Now, we do have some good news, which is going to come up next. We'll keep taking your questions, get into the comments, and we'll round them up at the end. But first, there is some good news in the world, and here it is. Now, it feels like about 1 billion years ago, but before the Brexit vote, Michael Gove said that people had had enough of experts. I know it seems bizarre then, seeing how many experts we've been listening to for the last 2 years, but that's what he said. I think I was about 7 at the time. Now, little girls are proving him wrong, and not for the first time. The British Toy and Hobby Association says that the sale of toys fell 3% last year, but the sale of STEM toys, science, technology, engineering, and maths toys, soared by 122%, driven in part by the popularity of the Barbie doll of Professor Sarah Gilbert, the inventor of the AstraZeneca vaccine. So, Aletha, is this a sign that little girls all think being expert in something is a pretty cool way to live your life? Or does it show that all their parents were out buying Lego during lockdown?
I mean, I must say, I was a massive Barbie fan as a child. And I think just looking at the dolls that I used to buy, I was a big fan of Disney and, the Disney princesses. It really does influence how you see the world, and your perspective does change. That was a pretty good looking Sarah Gilbert Barbie doll that they made of her. And I bet you a lot that, young girls out there are believing like, oh, I can just be, as great and amazing as Sarah Gilbert, and they'll grow to learn more about what she's done for our country and the world, and they will believe that they too can pursue careers in STEM. Just looking at some of the statistics this morning on my way in, and it was still quite shocking that in 2022 we've got less than half of STEM subjects filled with female university students, and it's like there's been a massive drive over the last few years for scholarships to include women and to get them feeling as though they don't have to struggle and work as hard to get into these courses. But it's another hurdle just trying to get into the workplace because of all of these natural biases that they will face going into somewhere where there aren't many people like them. But that seems to be shifting, and it's a good thing that we're starting with dolls. We start from the ground up, slowly work as they grow up, and I think we're heading in the right direction, so fingers crossed.
Hopefully. Although my little girl, who's 5, came home from school yesterday and said that one of the boys in her class told her she had to get married, and that was that.
Oh my God.
So the patriarchy starts early.
Yeah.
And so misogyny, and she went off and told him off for misogyny, which I thought was
yeah, brilliant.
Little boys, anybody, I'm sure they're charming little devils, but please try and encourage them the same as you would little girls, that everybody gets to fulfill their potential, because that's the problem that I've noticed being mother of a daughter, is that the people who are taking away her potential are her own classmates, because they're learning from their dads. Anyway, moving on. Let's go back to Cakegate. Let's have a quick roundup of your questions before we have to end. Now, Paul says, if Boris's Mrs. Carrie arranged the party, should she not be in line for a fine of £10,000? Correct me if I'm right, Aletha. Now, if you arrange an illegal gathering, you can get a fixed penalty notice, can't you? But it's about £200, and the maximum is £10,000 if you keep doing it. Is that right?
Yeah, that is correct. Yeah, that's right. I think from my understanding too.
She's got to organise a lot of parties.
I mean, over the weekend we did hear that she was inviting her mates around, her close friends, a number of times into number 11, and she was claiming they were work events. Sue Gray is aware of those events, and she's not very happy about them, apparently. So we shall see.
Yeah, if they're work events, of course, and you've invited someone from the number 10 estate to discuss work with you in the number 11 flat, that does happen, and it is perfectly okay under the rules. But if it's a work event, there would be officials there taking minutes. Exactly. So, were there minutes of the wine and cheese party? Were there minutes of the celebrations that happened after Dominic Cummings was defenestrated? We'll have to wait and see, won't we?
Yeah, absolutely.
Lewis says, we want Boris to stay. He's done a good job. He's got us out of the EU. Arguably, it was the British people that did that rather than Boris, but there we go. Then he had COVID to deal with. He's made one mistake. From my spreadsheet, Alison, he's made 22, and that's just the parties, never mind any other mistakes anyone might want to attribute to it. If everyone is honest, I bet some people broke the rules as well. Okay. Yes, lots of people did break the rules in some way, shape, or form. If you have a look for "I broke the rules" on Twitter, as in the phrase, put it in quote marks, you will see lots of people talking about how they broke the rules in order to give someone a hug, or to help an elderly neighbour when they went in their house when they shouldn't have done because they were lonely, or something like that. I think breaking the rules because you're going to be with a family member, or you're going to hold someone's hand when they're dying, that's all acceptable. And I'm sure there were quite a few people, as the justice system can tell you, there was about 18,000 people who were fined for some kind of coronavirus rules breach, including about 200 who had a party. But 200 people out of a country of 60 odd million, or 18,000 out of a country of 60 odd million, is not very many people, I'm afraid. And that number should include anybody who organised parties in Downing Street. Now, Ciro says, I did spend Easter, my birthday and Christmas alone without the possibility to stay with my family. And I spent 6 months in first lockdown without seeing my son and going to his party. I feel offended. That's the other side of it, isn't it, Aletha? This is why it's not going away for the Prime Minister. There's no way he can just say, look, whatever, this is minor. I've got a war to fight. It's not going to wash for millions.
I'd call on Boris Johnson, once this report is out, to literally just spend an hour or two just either bringing people in and letting them talk about the pains that they went through lockdown, or equally just reading a number of these comments that are coming in, because my stomach personally can't take it. I find it extremely difficult listening to this, and then just listening to him and looking at him in the comments, just almost smug that he's getting away with it. It's just quite sickening, to be honest with you. The public deserve better. They are elected. We elected them to represent us, to be held to the highest account. So it's not about other people, members of the public, breaking the rules. I mean, quite rightly, a lot of them are paying the price for that. So why can't the Prime Minister himself do that? It's something else.
A lot of people just elected Boris because of Brexit, and because he's they're like, well, that's fine. I knew he was a liar. I'm not bothered about him lying about when you elect a Prime Minister, he does need to do other things too. That's the issue. Now, Fiona says, why can't you just wait until we've all heard the report? There are more important news stories out there. Trial by media is disgusting. What's disgusting, Fiona, is having to have an investigation by the media because the police won't do it. And yes, trial by media is pretty bad. But the upside of that is that you, Fiona, get to have your say. And when the report comes out, and however much of it is actually revealed, you don't get to have your say at all. But at least you can have your say here on the news agenda or anywhere else, because it's in the media, and the media just reflects you, as we have been trying to do all day. So that's the benefit of it. Tom says, May the 23rd, 2020. Oh, God, I can't cry again today. My eldest sister died alone. June the 9th, 2020, my eldest brother died. I was unable to attend both funerals while they were partying. A very apt but rather heavy comment to end on, I think. There's so many stories like
I'm not sure, Susie. I don't know what else to say. It's just awful. It's really awful that everyone is having to rehash those moments and remember what they were doing and relive those experiences, those awful experiences. It's just hard enough losing someone to COVID, regardless of hearing about our Prime Minister, our cabinet ministers just laughing at us, essentially. It's awful.
There's nothing else you can say about it. I feel your pain, everybody who's given us comments like that. And let's hope that there is some kind of justice or reparation that comes in the future, whatever that is, whether the Prime Minister stays or goes or says sorry or doesn't, or whatever it is. Let's just hope that trauma and the offence that have been caused to everybody is somehow repaired. Right. Hopefully we may see Sue Gray later today, or we may see it tomorrow. We may not see it at all.
Tomorrow.
Who knows? But keep watching. Whenever it does come out or there's a statement in the House of Commons, I'm sure that the Mirror Facebook pages will be carrying it live. So hang about. Thank you for joining me, Aletha. Thank you, everyone, for taking part. And we'll see you again next Monday for another edition of the News Agenda. Bye-bye, everyone.